Broadcasting from the campus of Salisbury University, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7, putting Delmarva first.
Sea level rise. How will it affect Delmarva? Welcome to Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. There are hundreds of miles of coastal and bay shoreline, and the water is rising. In fact, scientists say that by 2050, it could rise as much as 2 feet, and by the end of the century, as much as 6 feet. On February 21st, a symposium will be held to consider the implications of this phenomenon that could hit the rural shorelines and the resorts like Ocean City. Conference is being sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Maryland, as well as the Chesapeake College Center for Leadership and Environmental Education. Take a look at these issues we have with us in studio. Our guests are Greg Farley, he's director of the center, as well as Barbara Hale, who is with the League of Women Voters of the Midshore. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Don. Good morning.
Well, let me start with you, Greg. How significant is this sea level rise in terms of what we expect to see, particularly in the Chesapeake Bay, but obviously it's also occurring along the coast as well of the Atlantic?
Well, we're worried about it for a couple of reasons. First of all, for the eastern shore in particular, all the low-lying areas that we love that help buffer us from the bay, the Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge, the coast of Dorchester and Wicomico counties. These are all tremendously low-lying areas, and even a 1 to 2 foot sea level rise is going to be a significant event there. I think we're already looking at some property loss and some sort of changes in the way of life on Smith Island and Taylor's Island and places like this. So that's a concern here on the eastern shore. Certainly the western shore is not immune to this, and there are lots of low-lying communities, including the historic sections of Annapolis, and even in some ways there are regions of the nation's capital that are going to be affected by rise along the Potomac. So we're concerned.
So Barbara, how does the League become involved in all this? You're co-sponsoring this measure.
Well, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization which educates people about issues and then takes advocacy positions on those issues. And a couple of years ago, the State League decided to conduct a study on sea level rise on the Atlantic coast and on both sides of the Chesapeake Bay.
And you actually live out there, so you could be very well affected. Tell me about that.
Well, I have only lived on the eastern shore for about 12 years, but I have already seen a change in the property I own. And I own, according to a 1940 survey, 25 acres of marsh. I recently had the property surveyed, and I have 13 acres. So this is very real for everyone on the eastern shore. I was in Annapolis Wednesday night and went to the end of a street in Eastport, and the tide was in the streets, in the parking lots, and around the buildings. And this was not an event we were reading about. This was just a high tide. So it really is real. If you're anywhere near the bay, you can see this happening every day.
Greg, obviously local governments, and we did a series a few years back looking at this issue and talking to particularly local officials in cities and towns and so on about this. And it didn't seem to matter whether or not they believed that there was global warming or climate change. All they knew was this was happening to their city. Do you think that cities and states are doing enough in this region to deal with this phenomenon, to try to mitigate it? And second of all, is this in the end a losing proposition in the sense that they're going to have to lose some of their town? Dorchester is going to have to lose some of its marsh, or the Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge is going to have to lose some of it. I mean, is there an inevitability about this, do you think?
So, quick disclaimer, I'm not a climatologist,
right,
but I do follow the literature, and I do think that the horse is out of the barn on some of this. I do think that some of this is probably inevitable. And I think that the ability of local governments to respond to this varies a great deal. And I think there's a lot of planning to be done. I think there's a lot of thinking about whether mitigation is possible. And I think there are some places that, like Crisfield, for example, where they've been hit on the chin a couple of times by sea level rise compounded problems that I think are going to force them to think about abandoning some properties and moving other assets inland. I think there are other communities where they will find the resources to try and bulwark and make things more resilient and try and harden the infrastructure, and they'll try and stay put. I think ultimately what has to happen up and down the eastern seaboard, and particularly in the mid-Atlantic, where this is 3 to 4 times faster than it is elsewhere in the world, is we have to decide what resources are available. We have to decide what decisions are best with the resources we have. And I think what we'll see emerge is a mosaic of solutions to this and a mosaic of decisions about whether there are solutions.
Well, now turn to someone who has been deeply involved in this, both as a congressman and now after he has left Congress as well. We'll go to that. We talked to him actually yesterday afternoon. Former Congressman Wayne Gilchrist is now director of the Sassafras Environmental Education Center, and which is now, of course, a part of the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy. He's also a longtime member of Congress who has been interested in the environment. So welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Don. Nice to be on.
So how serious is sea level rise as far as the Chesapeake Bay is concerned? And given that this is a global phenomenon, how do local officials deal with it?
Well, it's a global phenomenon. It's a real issue. There'll be a number of communities on Delmarva that will have to face rising seas and probably even move buildings eventually. It's a slow burn that people really need to pay attention to. So what should local government do? The first thing I would suggest for all the local governments is to gather all the information you can about the issue of rising seas, what's causing it to happen. Some people call it climate change. Some people call it global warming. But in essence, human activity is pushing huge amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere, which is enhancing the greenhouse effect, which means the Earth is warming. And as a result of that, glaciers are melting, seas are rising. The warming temperature makes seas expand, so they rise that way as well, and coastal areas are vulnerable. So find out all you can about the rate of sea level rise. The next generation is going to have to face these issues, so how can we prepare the next generation to deal with these issues the best way we can? Get as much information as you possibly can. Sit down with people who are planners, engineers, architects, agronomists, you name it, depending on where you live, and begin the process of coming up with a plan to deal with this ongoing issue.
For local officials, do they have to accept the idea that they're going to lose big chunks of their land? For instance, Dorchester County with the National Blackwater Wildlife Refuge, lots of that may very well go underwater because of this. Is part of the process that these counties and cities have to go through is the idea that eventually are going to lose something to the rise of the sea levels?
You know, the simple answer to that is yes. You know, if you're Cambridge or Crisfield or Ocean City or Annapolis or Rock Hall, whatever the case may be, or areas of downtown Salisbury, the issue is we expect the public, local government, to be competent at what they do, to be fully informed about all the issues they deal with, and then implement the best policy. So wherever you're a member of the town council or mayor or county commission, this is an issue that should be on the docket. Conversations should take place about these issues. Nobody has all the answers. Nobody knows what all the plans may or should be. But the conversation to gather information, to see what sea level may mean, and then what are our options now so that we can begin implementing those options over a period of time. Sea level isn't going to rise in 2030. It's not going to rise in 2020. It's not going to rise in 2050. It's slowly rising now. It might be inches at a time, but over time, when our grandchildren are, depending on how old your grandchildren are, but when kids today who are 10 years old, and we know that they don't stay 10 very long, in 30 years they're going to be 40 years old, and they'll be responsible for the landscape. So we want to prepare plans so when they're in charge, they will have seen that we took the right steps to do the right thing.
Now, recently, Maryland elected a Republican governor, Larry Hogan, only the second since Spiro T. Agnew, and one of his immediate decisions was to pull the new phosphorus regulations. First of all, what was your reaction to that decision and the controversy that surrounded those regulations?
Wait, the phosphorus regulation?
Yes. Right, the phosphorus regulations that he decided to pull. And to be fair to Governor Hogan, he has said that he's still interested in dealing with phosphorus, but he hasn't given us a time frame in terms of what or when those kinds of regulations might be put out. But what was your reaction to that decision? And does that indicate a direction of this Republican governor?
Well, I've met Larry when he was in the Ehrlich administration. I also knew his father. In fact, his father in 1988 helped me campaign for the House of Representatives. So I think Larry has integrity. He's an honest broker. And I think Larry will be open to understanding the nature of soil health, the complexity of soil, which certainly includes microorganisms, carbon and phosphorus and nitrogen and all those things. So I think Larry is the type of person that will take a look at all the issues that were controversial while Martin O'Malley was governor, and then piece by piece gather the kind of information that an elected official should gather to make good public policy. So the long and short of it, I think Larry will be open to good information about the problem of too much phosphorus in soil, the problem of sediment loss, erosion, and phosphorus in the Chesapeake Bay. So I'm hopeful that Larry will make decisions based on science, not based on political rhetoric that has no real value to it. Now, I will also say that most soil scientists, agronomists, began studying the issue of phosphorus in the soil in 1948. There was a lot of interest in the makeup of the complexity of soil and its value to a whole range of things, not just agriculture, but to the local ecology. So I know I'll certainly be one of those voices that urges Governor Hogan to take a look at the science, and there's a lot of good science in the University of Maryland. The Harry Hughes Agroecology Center has done a great deal of science and has available information that will be available to Larry on this. So I'm hopeful that Larry will take a look at it, and phosphorus buildup in the soil is a problem, and how best can we deal with it to keep agriculture economically viable, but also keep the Chesapeake Bay and our ecology environmentally sound.
Well, how do you balance, on the one hand, agricultural interests or the poultry interests versus environmental interests on the other? Given, for instance, the phosphorus regulations, there are a number of people within the agriculture community, particularly in the poultry community, who have said no, they don't believe the science that some of the folks have come up with, that these regulations were based on. There seems to be this gigantic gap between the two. And you were a politician. You had to deal with this kind of conflict between these various groups. Mm-hmm. How to resolve that, and will the agriculture community or the poultry industry ever come to grips with this and accept something? I mean, how do you read that?
I would hope the answer to all those questions is that there is no. If you take a hard, innovative look at science, agriculture, the environment, the closer you get to nature's design, the more productive you're going to be. That means that you have a problem with too much phosphorus in the soil. Well, then your soil is not healthy. Then you're not producing the kind of productivity that you can. All different kinds of soil have certain kinds of natural balances to them based on nature's design over millenniums. So on the one hand, you take a look at the science, and there's plenty of science out there. This is not new science. This is science that's been rehashed and rehashed and rehashed. So and Agroecology Center, the University of Maryland College of Agriculture, there's plenty of good stuff about soil health, not just phosphorus, but soil health. And then you take a look at soil health and how a good, healthy soil, based on the natural processes, is very productive for products that you grow in that soil, which means healthy soil reduces disease in crops. It reduces the wrong kinds of pests, insects that you have out there. So you look at the science, how do we make our soil healthy? We're going to be more productive that way. And if you have healthy soil, you have a good organic mix, you're going to have less sediment loss, less runoff. So it's it's science, not only for soil, but what you're producing, whether it's corn, wheat, or soybeans, or a variety of vegetables, or chickens, or whatever. Science, healthy soil. How do we improve productivity of agriculture? You improve productivity in agriculture when you have healthy soil. So it's a matter of getting people at the table that are willing to listen, willing to be innovative, and find a way to solve the problem of added expense, or a whole range of things. I will say that one of the purposes for the rain tax, if you want to refer to the rain tax, was to supplement agriculture to put on more cover crops. Cover crops does a lot of things. It not only improves soil health, but it reduces sediment loss. So when we think about agriculture, we and the expense of cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay, you can't just look at the farmer. You can't just look at agriculture in general. You have to look at human activity all over the place, from Salisbury to Baltimore City to Montgomery County.
Although Governor Hogan, I guess it was in his State of the State speech, said he wanted to do away with the so-called rain tax altogether. What do you make of that, given the importance that you believe it has?
What Larry said about the rain tax was he understands, it seemed from his speech, that he understands the problem with stormwater runoff, not just agriculture runoff, but stormwater runoff from our suburbs and our urban areas. So it's my understanding what Larry said is that he's going to do with the state mandate for the stormwater tax or the rain tax, and then let the counties decide how they want to come up with the money to deal with all the issues of stormwater runoff, which means the county can say, we want to keep the rain tax, or the county is going to do something else. But Larry did say we need to deal with the stormwater runoff. The counties are going to have to deal with it. So let's find ways to come up with the dollars to do that. So, in other words, a county could still have the rain tax, and that's where they would get the money to deal with septic tanks and agriculture.
Now, I saw a quote from you not too long ago, which you said during your time in Congress. You said, "I realized I spent most of my time going to meetings and more meetings, but very little was accomplished. Passionate speeches were often made only for the benefit of C-SPAN." How do you judge your accomplishments when it comes to the environment, and how much can be done at the federal level, especially given some of the politics that have been going on, certainly within the last 6 or 7 years?
Well, how much can be? How do I judge? I don't know how I judge my time in Congress. I did my best. I didn't change the world. No earth-shattering, innovative solutions to problems. I was just a small piece in a big cog, and I just worked the best I could on economic issues and environmental issues, and I always blended the two together. What's going to happen now in Washington? I know most of those guys over there I served with. Sometimes I don't like to watch the news too often because I find myself wringing my hands and clenching my teeth because not enough members right now are deeply, deeply interested objectively in good public policy. And if you are interested in good public policy, you are going to go to the source of good information, wrestle with that based on your perspective, have a legitimate conversation with opposing views, and work out a compromise that moves both positions forward. And I don't see much of that over there right now.
Let me ask you one quick final question before I let you go, because you were a member of the Republican Party for a very long period of time. You've seen the changes that have occurred certainly over the last 6 or 7 years. What do you make of where your party is now as opposed to, say, where it was when you began?
Well, I think the Republican Party, first of all, let me say one of my favorite quotes is Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes in 1890, Justice in the Supreme Court, said the Constitution was made for people with fundamentally differing views, which means, we can be all over the board based on our Constitution. But then he was making an assumption that people would get together and work out the details. The Republican Party, I think, now more than ever, is fragmented. You have some very good, honest working people, I guess, but you have their points of view some are still a little bit moderate. Some are way off to the right. The Texas Senator Cruz is quite different from Lindsey Graham from South Carolina. Our own Andy Harris, fits somewhere in between in that. John Boehner used to be relatively moderate, and he may still be, but his caustic rhetoric about the president is not helpful to the nation. John could say, I disagree with President Obama, and I think we ought to do this, but we'll continue to work together, instead of making derogatory remarks that don't help the relationship or the conversation or the public policy, let alone the American people when they get disenchanted with their leaders arguing all the time. So, the Republican Party is pretty well fragmented, and to some extent it's going to be up to the public to determine the kind of, the Republicans at any rate, the kind of Republican representative that they want to elect.
We've been speaking with former Congressman Wayne Gilchrist. He's director of the Sassafras Environmental Education Center, which is a component of the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy. Also has had a long-time interest in the environment. And, Congressman, we appreciate you taking some time to talk to us.
So nice to talk to you, Don.
Okay, we'll see you again.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And we're back in the studio, and our guest in studio are Greg Farley. He is director of the Chesapeake College Center for Leadership in Environmental Education, as well as Barbara Hale, who is with the League of Women Voters of the Mid-Shore. Well, let me ask you, Greg, so listening to the former congressman, he seems to have an optimistic view of what we're to get out of Annapolis, and particularly with Larry Hogan. Do you share that optimism? How do you assess this new governor in relationship to what you've seen him both say and both do?
Well, I think we have to be optimistic, and we have to place a little bit of trust in our elections process and our elected officials. I'll say that I disagree very strongly with Mr. Hogan on his assessment of the science. You don't get to believe in climate change, sir. It's not a belief system. It's a pile of evidence. But can we work together to find a way forward for the Bay? Will the legislature work with the governor to forge reasonable policies that meet as many needs as possible? I think there's good reason to believe that there are allies in place that will help us do that.
Because one of the questions I asked him was how you try to square the circle. That is, on the one hand, you have environmentalists who say X, whether it's phosphorus or sea level rise, but particularly phosphorus. On the other hand, you have the agriculture community and the poultry industry. Many of the farmers that I've talked to have said they don't believe that they're the problem, or they minimize the idea of the phosphorus management tool. How do you get those two sides together, particularly when one side says, look, we're not the problem? I mean, how do you do that? I mean, I don't know how he did it as a congressman, so I
don't have it. I don't think there are any easy answers to that question. But I think in my experience, where people do tend to come together are over immediate issues where everybody has a stake in the game, where everybody really does have something they care about that's in common, and maybe they come at it from different angles. I think in that way, the Bay is a wonderful asset, because I think it's probably fair to say that all players in this arena really do value the health of the Chesapeake Bay. I think all of us, from whatever camp we happen to put ourselves into, would really like to see the Bay restored to its former health. We really like to see vibrant coastal communities. And I think that's the strength of organizations like Mr. Gilchrist and the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy, because what they're really interested in are vibrant local communities and healthy environments. And I think those are good common starting points for conversations like this.
Barbara?
And I think this is why we're holding this forum. We'll focus on resiliency and adaptability and sustainability, but we all are part of the problem, no matter where we live in Maryland. And if we can accept that, then what do we do about it? What are our options? What choices must we make? What decisions must we come together to make? And we hope this forum will help people understand what some of their options are and begin to look for those when they're talking across a wide spectrum of beliefs about this, but knowing, because we see it every day, that the sea level is rising.
Greg?
I just wanted to point out that I think one of our roles as a community college, and we serve 5 counties on the midshore between Kent and Dorchester, one of our roles is to be the honest convener, to be a sort of neutral ground and a conveyor of good information and a broker of honest conversations. And that's one of the things the college and my center are most excited about for this forum on Saturday.
Well, one final question before we let you go, because actually I was rereading Tom Horton's book, I guess, Changing the Tides, or Tide Changing, I guess it was, written many years ago. It was sort of interesting. But one of the things he talked about suggested that right now we have this thing called the poultry industry. And it's certainly embedded both in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the social structure of the Eastern Shore. But he says, it hasn't always been that way. And that, we had orchards and fruit and that kind of thing before that. So that there's no sense that in 100 years, poultry will necessarily be here. Well, I'll direct this to you, Greg. Is there a sense that anybody is looking beyond the current set of parameters when it comes to something like a poultry industry, that maybe we might move from that? Or are we still just simply concentrate on how do we deal with the poultry industry and its effect on the shore?
I think both of those conversations are going on simultaneously. I think there are a lot of good voices who are interested in a vibrant and healthy poultry industry here. And I think there's a lot of voices within that camp that would like to reduce the effects of the poultry industry on the Bay watershed. But at the same time, there's a fantastic set of conversations emerging about sustainable agriculture, about the potential for food hubs, about the potential for local food distributed to local people, about the power of local institutional purchasing to try and bolster a more diverse agricultural economy. I think that conversation is very rich. Certainly, I've got a lot of sort of fingers out and feelers out to people in that community trying to sort of stir the pot and make those conversations happen. I think there's a lot of learning left to be done. I think that stage of the conversation is still very much at the information gathering and brainstorming phase. But I think over the next 10 to 15 years, I think we'll see a really great diversification. I don't think the idea is to push poultry out, but I think the idea is that if we want to be a stronger and more resilient set of communities, that we really need to think about diversifying that base so that we're not entirely reliant upon the poultry industry, and especially given the international and global forces on that industry. I think nobody knows what the future of it's going to be.
So, and then tell me a little about the symposium. Where is it going to be?
We're going to host it at Chesapeake College. It's held in our Todd Performing Arts Center in Y Mills on the Y Mills campus. Next Saturday, the 21st, we'll start at about 9:30 in the morning. Breakfast is included with registration, as is lunch. We'll have an opening keynote from Dr. Don Bosch at University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. We've got 3 fantastic breakout sessions lined up. One of them that speaks directly to sort of building cooperation among the alphabet soup of agencies that's necessary to do anything on the Bay. One that's involved with sort of building resiliency into local communities. And I can't remember what the third topic breakout is, but we've got 3 fantastic breakout speakers. And Mr. Gilchrist is slated to close the day at about 3 o'clock. Registration is available online via there's an Eventbrite event set up. And anybody who'd like to call my office at the college, they're more than welcome to do that. I'm happy to give them information.
What's the number that you're?
410-822-5400, and my extension is 2389.
Barbara, any final thoughts?
Well, our third breakout session is before the next. What do we do? So we encourage everyone to come because we hope they can leave having learned something about not why this is happening, but what do we do? And be a part of the solution.
We've been speaking with Greg Farley. He is director of the Chesapeake College Center for Leadership and Environmental Education. Also, Barbara Hale, who is with the League of Women Voters of the Mid-Shore. And, of course, earlier we talked to former Congressman Wayne Gilchrist, all about, of course, sea level rise and the symposium that'll be coming up a week from tomorrow, I guess it is, with the Chesapeake College. Appreciate you all talking with us. This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
This has been Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Chris Rank produces and is our audio engineer. Don Rush is your host. For podcasts, visit our website, delmarvapublicradio.net, or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast in iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on PAC 14. To view the schedule, visit the Daily Times or visit pac14.org.